Join me for a great conversation with Traci Chernoff, bringing the human back into human resources. We chat about AI, we chat about metrics in HR, and we talk about metrics as they pertain to AI. Hope you enjoy it. Hello, welcome to Biotech Bites. I'm your host, Steve Swan, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Traci Chernoff, who hosts and owns the podcast, Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And so what I want to do today, what I usually do is our podcast talks usually with IT leaders within biotech, but we're so tied to human resources and such with what we do, as executive recruiters. I really, really enjoyed our conversation and enjoy what you do. So I kind of want to dive into that a little bit. I think that my audience and a lot of the folks that pay attention to what we do would enjoy your angle and your thoughts about these things. So that's really what I'm thinking
Totally.
about. Yeah.
No, I really appreciate the opportunity. I mean, it's interesting because when I think about HR and when I think about recruiting, of course, it's all so connected. But the way that I try to look at HR and our purpose in terms of, what role we play in business and for organizations, it's relevant for all parts of an organization, whether it's recruiting, whether it's sales. I mean, if we think about what it means to be a successful, in my opinion, what it means to be a successful HR partner or HR professional, it should be someone, again, my opinion, who is helpful, supportive, looking to help solve problems, strategic, and can really help to scale businesses. And that's so relevant across every industry, across every department, again, within an organization, especially with recruiting. I mean, I always say that someone's experience in a company starts with their first interaction with that company. And that's most of the time with a recruiter or someone on the recruiting side.
Right. External. Right.
Yeah. And it matters. It matters when someone has a great recruiting experience or a great candidate experience. It sets them up. I almost want to say that they have an advantage starting in a company, because then it's like they have all of these positive experiences that they're bringing with them going into a new company, which can be pretty terrifying.
Sure.
To start somewhere new.
Sure.
And, and they're going into this new experience and, they have all of these things that worked really well. Maybe the interview process was seamless. Maybe getting the salary that they wanted was seamless. Maybe the conversations were great, whatever it might be. Maybe it was all of those things. Then they're starting out, hopefully, with a great onboarding experience. And it just really sets the stage.
Right. Well, and I always put that all in the candidate journey, right?
Yeah.
And so the candidate journey starts with the first time I call them, you call them, anybody calls them to talk to them about company X, talk to them about the Swan Group, whatever. But it goes all the way through, like you just said, the onboarding, and then the teaching them about the organization. It begs the question to me that why do you think, or why do you feel, in your opinion, that some companies, I'm using your words.
Yeah, I have a lot of opinions.
Why some companies, I don't want to say, maybe I'll use the term, don't emphasize candidate experience or candidate journey. Why would that be? What is it? Are they getting lazy? Maybe are they not interested in it? We're the Swan Group. Everybody wants to be here. We're good.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. You know what I'm saying? So,
Totally.
because I've had instances where the candidate journey is awesome, and as an external recruiter, you really want to partner with a company who gives the same experience or as high level. But then there's other companies that maybe they lose their way, and we can talk to them about it. And I've had, I'm looking around my conference room here. I had one time somebody come in from I'll give you a quick experience. Guy comes in from California to interview with a company here in New York. He calls me to complain they didn't even put him in seats with extra legroom. He expected first class, but he didn't even get extra legroom. And when he gets here, he's here for a whole day interview. They stick him in a conference room and give him a tray of food. And this is a big company. Give him a tray of food for 20 minutes with nobody to talk to. Say, hey, we'll see you in 20, So
not great.
He's like, I'm done. I'm not. He didn't even want to stay for the second
If
half.
the leg room wasn't enough.
Yeah,
I mean, I obviously am scoffing at that a little bit, because anytime I was flown out for an interview, I was in coach, but or like on a train because I'm in New York, so whatever. But you know what I'm trying to say. But at the end of the day, it's a great example because this company that you're referring to, they probably thought they were doing an amazing job. They were probably like, "Oh, we got this tray of bagels, maybe some lox, cream cheese. It's going to be great." But people, when they're interviewing, they're looking to get insight about the company. And when that's what they're not getting a whole lot. They want to meet people. They want to see what's the vibe, what's the energy, what kind of experience are they going to have. So to answer your question, I think that there are a few reasons why companies might not focus on candidate experience. Either A, they don't understand the connection and that there is a correlation between candidate experience and employee experience, and then even further from that, employee retention. They also might not care. To your point, they're, big Fortune 500. You're lucky to even be interviewing with us. You'd be lucky to have a job with us. It could be that. And maybe for some companies it really is truly that. And then I also think it's possible that there are companies that don't really emphasize or understand the importance of HR and our function in a business. Because again, even though sometimes recruiting teams are a little separate from HR or aren't necessarily as cohesive, because especially the larger the company, sometimes you see those teams kind of branching out from one another. But I find that companies that really put an emphasis on strong HR practices, especially when the leaders themselves are not HR leaders,
Yeah,
that's where you see the importance being placed on those things like candidate experience, like employee experience, like employee retention, and so on and so forth. I have worked for companies that have kind of fit all of those things, which is why I say that, or share those three examples, because I think they're real.
yeah,
And maybe there's just a caveat there where maybe it's like all of the above. Maybe there's a company that's like, oh, that person's lucky to interview with us, and we don't really care about what experiences look like, because HR is not a significant part of our focus, of our business strategy.
sure.
It's highly possible.
So I'll finish that example by saying this gentleman ended up consulting there, so he's making a lot more money, right?
Oh, good for yeah,
Yeah.
good yeah, good for him.
But yeah, so they didn't hire him as a full timer. They hired him as a contractor.
No, but he won in the end,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, do you have any metrics? Do you know the dollar amount that it can cost an organization for a mishire, right? And some of these things can lead to a missed hire, right?
Yes, yes.
You have the right person, but boy, we didn't quite get our process right. So we had to hire number 2 or 3, or because a lot of folks talk about today, what I see a lot of is with my business, I'm getting the calls from folks where the leaders that are saying, well, we had either a mishire or turn downs or whatever. And I think a lot of folks are shortcutting the process. That's kind of different from what we're talking about here. But nonetheless, it's still a mishire. It's still somebody that they miss in the process. So, do you know any numbers? Like, I mean, I'm thinking about the CFO who's watching this right now. He or she wants to know, right?
Yeah,
What's it going to cost me when I miss one of these? And
yeah.
is my investment going to be on the other side to not miss one of these?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. I did a bit of research on this a few years ago. Can't remember if it was for my podcast or for something work related, but as of a few years ago, I believe it was a Gallup study. I'll see if I can find it so we can share. It might not be Gallup, but it was
That'd
something.
be
It was a
awesome. I'd love that.
notable. Yeah, I'll share with you what I can find. But at that time, it was $10,000 at minimum per hire that was missed. So that's factoring in the hourly rates of every single person that is working to get that person through the interview process. That's your recruiter, that's your person scheduling them, that's someone sourcing those candidates, that's the hiring manager and the full interview team. And some people are making a whole lot of money. And when you add up those hourly rates, it becomes exorbitant. So if you think about even, more senior level roles that are missed, like this person, for example, that you used in your previous example, even though he ended up consulting and it wasn't totally a miss. If that was a miss, that would be a lot of money. And you factor in more tangible things like a flight, a hotel, cars, stipends, and things like that. I mean, it can really be well above 10K.
Let's just say it's 10K. And I think what you're talking about is all the way till the day that that person walks through the door, right? Can we? I mean, we can't measure. Let's say they paid me a fee to find that missed person, right? they miss one person, they hired their number two, maybe not the best hire, but a decent hire nonetheless, maybe a year later they're gone because part of this happened or that happened or they weren't the right fit.
Yeah.
It took,
Yeah.
it took down some of their folks internally for training, for all that
Yes.
stuff. So
Yeah, that number goes even higher. I don't know that there are so many studies on the cost of poor hiring,
okay,
because that's really what,
that's what we're talking about.
once someone is hired, yeah, then it's like, well, hiring the wrong person is even more costly, if you
Right,
ask me,
right.
because then you're having a reverberation throughout the organization. And by the way, I'm sure this goes without saying, but just to vocalize it, when you have a candidate who has a poor experience, you inevitably do your brand a huge disservice, because they're going back out into that wide world and they're not speaking so highly about your company. It happened to me once. I was still working in retail at the time. This was like when I was working at Target. That's kind of where I sharpened my HR knives. That's what I always like to say. It was a great experience. And I was just kind of, I wasn't necessarily looking to leave, but I was doing what any, good person would do, and I was kind of seeing what's out there, because that's a totally normal good thing to do, and also to keep your interview skills strong. And so I was interviewing with a really well-known company, and they put me through, like, I don't know, 8 interviews, probably more than 10 hours of total interviews. They had me staying in a hotel here, staying in a hotel there, and then they were like, "Oh, you don't have enough experience for the role." And I was like, "You didn't know that when you read my resume?" After 8 interviews? So, look, it's totally fine. It's fine when you don't get a job. And frankly, I didn't necessarily put all of my eggs in that basket. I ended up leaving a year later for a different role, and it was the right move for me. But at the end of the day, I would never interview for that company again. And my family knows that experience that I went through. They were like, "What a waste of your time." And so this is what I say, is like, every experience that we have with candidates and with employees, which goes back to kind of your original point, is like when we around when we bring someone on that isn't the right fit, you have the potential to make or break your your brand awareness and the message that's out in the world. And so in the same vein, when we hire someone that isn't the right fit because we're being hasty, or because we feel that we have to have an immediate fill in that role, and we're cutting corners maybe, or we think that that person is going to be the right fit, and sometimes we do that with good intentions. We think that that person is really the right hire, but sometimes people don't work out. You have this, again, this whole reverberation throughout the organization, but then that person potentially will end up losing their employment. And that's not a great experience either. It's not a great experience for the person communicating that to them. And it's certainly not a great experience for someone on the receiving end of that message. And my final anecdote there is that I have I have been in many situations throughout my 10 plus years as an HR partner, to many business leaders across many industries. And there have been people throughout my career who I say to that hiring manager, you know, I don't know, they didn't show up for your interview. Seems like a risky hire. They don't have what you're really looking for. Wouldn't you rather take a little bit more time to whatever feedback I've given, and then maybe a year later, or maybe even less, or maybe more, it comes around where then I have to be part of the termination conversation.
Right.
And I'm not the kind of partner that's like, "Oh, I told you so."
Right.
But
You can do that here.
sometimes I'm like, yeah, exactly. I can do that here.
Yeah.
I sometimes I want to be like, this is exactly what I'm saying. And so then there's a learning experience where the hiring manager's like, "Oh, you did kind of call this out." It's like, yeah, look, it's all what we learn from. There's
It is.
never a bad experience. It's just all a learning
Right.
experience, as long as we are learning from it.
Sure. Yeah, and I find with the processes that I go through with a lot of companies, they will come to me, they will ask questions, they will, whether it's about salary, whether it's about do we need these skills, whether whole bunch of different things. But at the end of the day, lots of times, like, well, no, something, not lots of times, sometimes. Well, you're wrong. We think this. Okay, that's cool. Well, then
Totally.
what?
Every business leader knows best.
Mhm.
And we can give, until there's someone who maybe knows better. And, I have found a lot in my career that, especially being in a position where most of my career I've spent as an individual contributor. And there's a lot of a lot that rides on your ability as an HR person to influence. And the same kind of goes with recruiting too. Like there's a lot of, how do you leverage those relationships to really drive the right candidate forward? And similarly with HR, it's like if you can have really strong relationships that you can influence more decision making. And so I found that there are some times where I might know what's going to happen 5 months down the line or 5 steps down the line, and no matter how much, importance I've placed on that relationship, no matter how much influencing I've done to help guide a different decision, a business leader might just say, and it could be any person within an organization. It could even be an HR leader. You could tell them until you're blue in the face, this, maybe we should try this, or maybe we should do that. At the end of the day, that leader might make their own decision regardless of the insights that you have. And you have to be able to overcome that and just keep going and influence in other directions. And eventually, sometimes you are proven right and then it comes back around and that's great. Otherwise, sometimes you're proven wrong and you're like, okay, maybe there was a different approach to this particular problem.
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing this 26 years, and I've found if I had to if I had to say one thing that I think is sort of the silver bullet in our business, communication, effective communication. You've really got to make sure that you keep, let everybody know each side what's going on all the time. I've had several people come to me at the end of a process and say, Steve, I was interviewing with 3 other companies. And the reason why I went with the Swan group or whatever, is because of you. I would call them 2, 3 times a week just to say, hey, I haven't heard anything, because people's brains wander, they just
Yes,
go. And in order to
that's great.
keep folks, the right candidate, right, going in the right direction, you got to continually communicate with them. I had to get back to the point you were making a minute ago in 2013. I'll never forget this. I was recruiting this guy for a role that a decent sized company. The company had a few thousand folks in it, and a technical role. They were doing bring your device to work kind of stuff. So they needed somebody that had done that and da, 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 da. And so I found this one gentleman. The company was down here in our area, but I found this one gentleman up in the Boston area. So I was going up for a World Series game, went and met him for lunch, said hi to him. But I I went to they interviewed some folks through me. Then the hiring manager came to me and said, Steve, I don't know that we're going with candidate X, the guy that I had there. They wanted to go with candidate Y. And I said, well, what's the difference? And candidate Y was a consultant right now, and he had been putting in a particular security software for these devices. Basically, they only needed somebody to implement a software that would be live in 6 months. The gentleman that I had in place, based on the description, he had set up twice, bring your own device, and 2 other biotechs, and so on and so forth. So I'd never done it before, but I called the CIO and I said, hey, can you interview both candidates? Just if I'm totally crazy, call me crazy, and we're calling it a day. He got involved, and then he called me back and said, I can't even believe they were interviewing the gentleman that was the consultant. And
Yeah.
yeah, so they hired this person, and he's still at the organization. But
No, it's a great point. Great example.
yeah, you needed somebody to handle the whole thing, and if you needed somebody to do that little piece, hire the consultant. You can get that done
Yes.
quickly. So I guess my point is that your continual communicate, like I did with everybody in the process, but also understand, being able to stand back and see where the organization is and what they're really looking at, and are they getting too close to the trees to see the forest? And I had that conversation all the time.
It happens, especially if a company is hiring like in a new market, or they're hiring a bunch of people at once. The focus goes from quality to quantity. And hopefully you get both. Hopefully you hire your critical mass with the right quality candidates. But that's to me, that's like where we come in, where our process comes in, because we should be able to not only say, hey, this is really what you're looking for, but with the right candidate, here's the potential, but also be able to bring someone out of the weeds and say, look, sure, they fit your budget, fine, but is that enough? Or they have, the years of experience that you're looking for, but is that enough? Like throughout my career, I've always tried to focus on, okay, what are we going to need in 5 years from now? What can I anticipate from our needs from a strategic standpoint for the business needs in 5+ years from now? And 5 years for some companies is a very long time. For most companies, it's a very long time. The small businesses, especially, or smaller businesses. At the end of the day, though, you do have to think that way, because otherwise, every decision you make today is going to be such small potatoes, and you're not going to be thinking strategically enough. Certainly, you could say, okay, in 5 years, I want to have, this automation built out so that X, Y, and Z can happen without me being involved. Fine. Maybe that's not something that you can use today, but finding the right system that can grow with you, for example, is the way to think about that. And I think it's the same thing with candidates, with human resources,
Sure.
literally, not necessarily like the department, but human resources, right?
Yeah.
It's like when you find a candidate who has like all of the will in the world, it's like skill versus will, all of the will in the world, and maybe they're just shy of the number of years of experience, or they don't have that specific industry, but you can train them. And sure, that takes time and it takes resources, but they have everything else. Invest in that person. Like I don't know if you watch Shark Tank, but they talk about this all the time, that they invest in people.
Right.
They're not investing in the business, because the business can go one way or another at any point, but the person is what you stand behind. And I fully subscribe to that.
100%.
I think it's a great way to a great outlook.
I followed Warren Buffett and was listening to his annual meeting again this weekend. And
Classic.
yeah, he says you can't make a good deal with a bad person. Just if it's a
No,
bad person, just walk.
it's a bad
be
deal.
done.
That's right. Walk away.
Walk away. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I've had, many instances over the years where I've had to walk away or figure out what's under the, under the covers, or what's behind the curtain. And we've had to make those calls and those choices with many, many, many companies. Again, they
Yeah.
start small, a lot of them that I work with, and then they continue to grow. And what ends up happening, and you kind of brought it up there at the beginning, what I see a lot of these companies doing as they get, I don't know if it's overwhelmed or what it is, but they start focusing more on the metrics than the person, right? Do you see that?
Totally.
What?
Oh yeah, all the time.
Why
This
do they
is
do that? What's going on there?
why do they why do they do that? That's a great question. It's also quite loaded, because this is kind of the whole mission of my podcast, is that, for almost 5 years ago at this point, right? Yeah, almost 5 years ago, I started my podcast because I was so fed up with seeing business leaders, including HR leaders, by the way, talking about people. And keep in mind, almost 5 years ago was COVID time. It was the
Yeah.
fall of 2020 that I started my podcast. Everyone was talking about like what was happening in the world without talking about the impact to the individual. Furloughs, it was like, oh, 5% of people are being furloughed, whatever the number was. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? What is 5% of an organization with 10,000 employees, right? Like, that's a significant number. What's 5% of 200 employees? Still a significant number. Like, you're talking about 5% of an organization. What does that mean?
Right.
And so I found myself like wanting to pull my hair out. And this is like not an exaggeration.
Don't do that.
So
I already
what
did
is
that.
everyone? But I was like, why is everyone not, focused on the right thing? And so that's what helped me to create my podcast, Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources, because I was like, we can't talk about people as numbers. Sure, we're going to analyze people when we look at percentages and dollar amounts and, overhead or whatever. Fine, that happens. But every number is represented by a person.
Right.
So if you're giving even when you look at good stuff like, oh, we're going to have 4% increases on merit and an annual performance review or something like that for a company, right? I think they're actually saying in the news that 4% will be the average, by the way, for annual merit increases this year, which is pretty high. It's higher than inflation. Yeah, it's pretty good, which is great. But as an example, that's good news, but some people are not going to get that.
Well, they're not working.
So, right. Or they're not working. So it's like when we look at these percentages, what actually shakes out at the employee, at the individual, at the human level. So why do companies only look at numbers? I don't think it comes from a bad place. I don't think that people are like, I don't care about people. I hate these guys anyway. Like, I don't think that's what's happening. Instead, I think what's happening is that as you scale in your career and you get higher and higher and higher, you're obviously you're not so focused on the individual, and you're more focused on like the overall, the high level, the holistic view of things. And so you're just looking at numbers, you're looking at spreadsheets, and you're not taking that time to say, oh, well, we're going to be, maybe a company is going to have a reduction in force. We've seen layoffs happening. Even PwC, I think, just announced they're going to have 1,500 job cuts by the end of the year. Those 1,500 people, they're looking at it like, oh, okay, maybe it's a percentage, right? And this is the amount that we're going to be paying out in severance at the end of that, at the end of 2025. But for those individuals, it's extremely impactful. All of those individuals have families and
Yeah, their
mortgages or
sample
rents,
size
whatever.
is one, right?
Their sample size is one, exactly. So I think it's just a matter of like the distance away from the recipient of information or the end user, so to speak, if we think about, like technology. And that's where when at least in the processes that I'm involved in, I really try to help leaders think about what their decisions actually mean.
Sure.
So throughout my career, of course, I've had to, support with furloughs or layoffs and things like that. Even if we look at my experience during COVID, we had to furlough a handful of people, a lot of people. And when we were making that decision, I was like, okay, well, we have our methodology for how who we're going to furlough and how. And what is the impact? Who are these people? Where are they located? What other things do we need to think about? And so sometimes when you take that extra step to take all of those numbers and then take that extra step and attach them to the actual people, it helps leaders to remember what decisions they're actually making because it's much easier to reduce numbers than it is to reduce people.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't think it's coming from a bad place, but it is really important for people at that table. Hopefully, there is an HR leader at the table helping to guide some of those decisions or support in some of those decisions. While they're not making them, they certainly can influence the trajectory of them. But there should be someone at the table thinking about that.
So focusing on the metrics, right? The HR metrics. Are there good metrics and are there bad metrics as you see them, in your opinion? And I tend to tag everything to economic incentive, right? So is there an economic incentive? Are things rewarded maybe in the wrong way in the HR community when it comes to some of those economic incentives? And if I'm getting too close to the bone, let me know. I'll back off, right?
No, it's funny. I grimaced there because I definitely think that there are things that we over incentivize. From a good metrics versus bad metrics standpoint, I believe that data is great regardless because data helps to tell a story, it helps us to make decisions. And I find myself very frustrated or annoyed when people make decisions without as much data as possible. Like if someone gets pushed back on a budget for a salary, but they're just looking at total costs based on, the US, but they're not considering cost of living, for example, that doesn't make sense. So this is kind of just a very basic example of how data is your friend. And I think some of the best metrics that teams can measure are employee referral information because that's a great measure of how engaged people are. It's the same, kind of goes hand in hand with employee net promoter score. If people run surveys, they're familiar with that metric, which can be helpful. But I think that the ENPS or employee net promoter score is asking how likely are you to recommend X company as a place to work. There's nothing more directly correlated than employee referrals. So to me, it's like, okay, what does a number, it kind of goes back to the same thing. What does that number mean? So we have the quantitative, but what's the qualitative? And when you measure how many people at the company were employee referrals or who were once referred by someone that once worked for the company, how long they've been here, what the average tenures of employee referrals are, all of that is really interesting to me. And then I also think, looking at growth across an organization. I will say in my career, it's been very hard to find reports that were like automatically generated by my tools that we used that said, oh, you have had X number of promotions, X number of organizational changes, X number of, individual contributor to team leaders, whatever it might be. But all of that growth information, if people can start to track that, because again, the data lives somewhere. So it's just a matter of someone pulling it together, can be really interesting. In terms of bad metrics, I think, and this is kind of going back to like why I grimaced around, what are we over incentivizing? It's it's metrics that we don't actually care about as a company, or that a company doesn't actually care about, meaning they're measuring something that they're never going to do anything about. Like, if a company is like, look, DE&I has been a huge talking point over the course of the last few years. And diversity, equity, and inclusion has been a part of organizations for decades. So as long as companies are not doing anything illegal, they should continue to focus on creating an organization that brings people from all different backgrounds, educational backgrounds, work experiences. All of those things are good things. And that's not changing anything about an organization. But we also see that there are organizations who have measured some of these things without having a whole lot of intention, or have, done so just because they felt they had to. And so these are things that don't actually help promote any of the things that we a company might look to promote. So on the other hand, it's like, if you see a company saying, "Oh, our regrettable attrition, our goal is X%," right? Maybe their goal is 20% regrettable attrition because it's so egregious today, which I would think 20% would be pretty high, but they do nothing to improve the experience of an employee. They collect feedback on a survey, and they don't do anything to improve on that feedback or close the loop on that feedback. Those are bad metrics, because then you're committing. You're saying, "Hey, we really want your feedback. We really want you to stay. We want to improve regrettable attrition," but then you do nothing to problem solve those things. And this is why I bring up DE&I also, because I think it's a hot button topic because of a lot of misunderstanding on both sides of the coin. And similarly with employee engagement, it doesn't have to be that heavy of a lift. Like, if people are telling you that they need more work-life balance, maybe help them to prioritize. Or maybe you have to look at how you communicate things, right? So I went on a very long tangent there, but
No, that was good.
that, to me, those are bad metrics when we do nothing with the data.
Yeah, well, and that's that's the definition for you of a bad metric,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Collecting
Yeah.
data just to collect data, right?
Right. Like, and then you're wasting your own time. Like, what are you doing?
Right. And then that's right. That's everybody spinning wheels right there. And I think that, again, I'm going to go back to, I like tagging everything to some level of economic incentive, because there's got to be a
Right.
reason, like you said, for doing things. And so if we go back to, I'm just going to stick with your example, DE&I, right? If organizations understood that a more diverse workplace, right, would lead to better, more well-rounded decision making, which could lead, can lead, if you look at
Yeah.
stock market performance or company performance, could lead to that,
Yes.
then it makes sense.
Yeah, sometimes you do have, I mean, actually, probably 90% of the time, you do have to appeal to the bottom line. Like, why is it helpful for, you know, a CFO potentially, even though I'm not saying that a CFO doesn't care about those things, but a CFO's job is to, keep the purse strings tight and really ensure that the business is going to maintain its financial stability and grow over time. So, how, something that they might care about emotionally, societally, that's fine, but you also do have to appeal to your audience, and you have to know how some of these things shake out and play a role for people outside of your own function. And actually, one of the things that I was thinking about too when you mentioned that is that, with regard to creating a diverse workforce, can you, like, as much as we both would probably love to be in a room full of Steves and Tracys who always agree with everything that we say, that's not how we grow.
I'll hang out with the Tracys. I don't need to be with
Yeah.
the Steves. I'm good.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I would love to be in a room full of meat. No, I'm just kidding.
Right.
But it's like, you don't really want to be in a room full of people who always agree with you.
Correct.
Like, diversity is also in thought. People from different backgrounds, from different educational levels, and even work experiences. This is why sometimes different industries can be an okay thing, because they're bringing in experiences that you might not have had. And that does create a very productive workforce, because you're innovating and you're challenging what exists, and challenging the status quo, to me, is one of the best ways to really stay progressive. I mean, I actually did an episode once on the blockbuster effect. This was like early on, like maybe 4 years ago or so. And I talked about how companies run the risk of being the next blockbuster if they don't figure out how to innovate and challenge the status quo and listen to other people's ideas. You don't want to be the loudest person in the room. You should really hear what other people have to say and offer.
Sure. there was a I'm going to digress for a second here. There was an old show called The Twilight Zone. You may or may not have
Oh,
ever
of
heard of it.
course I know
Okay,
it,
Rod
yeah,
Sterling.
of course.
He did one episode. One guy, you know how the show always starts with somebody thinking about or
Dee, dee,
doing
dee,
something.
doo, dee, dee,
Yeah.
dee. Yeah.
And so one there's an episode where this guy's like, I wish everybody was like me. Well, the rest of the show, everybody wore the same stuff, had the same
Oh my
job, drove
god.
the same car, lived in the same kind of house. And the guy's walking around like, this sucks. Like
Yeah.
everybody's making the same decisions. There's no
Yeah.
diversity. We're not getting anywhere. We're just going in circles.
Spin I am, so well acquainted with the Twilight Zone because of my parents and my grandparents, but also I went to Binghamton University, and I don't know if you know this at all or if you're familiar, but there's a library tower in the center of campus, and it looks very similar actually to the Tower of Terror in
Oh, okay.
Disney
Yeah.
World.
Yeah.
But actually, the word on the street, the lore is that that library tower was based on the wait, maybe I'm getting it backwards. That that the library tower was based on the tower in the Twilight Zone. There was like the hotel
Yeah.
scene,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I
Very
can't
cool.
now I'm like, as I was saying it, now I'm like, is it the opposite?
Confuse
But
yourself.
confused myself, but this is why I can't be in a room full of me's. But, Rod Sterling, he was from Binghamton, so
Oh, was he?
that's the
Okay.
connection. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Good school.
anyway,
Very good school.
yeah.
I read up
Thank you,
on,
yes.
yeah, very good.
Thank you.
Um,
I'm very proud to be
yeah,
yeah.
alum, good.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just, I think about those things and I look at everything again. People are going to get motivated to do things when there's a reason to do them, and that's when I say, you look at economic incentive, and sometimes some of these metrics that are rewarded, are uh miscued sometimes, right? So
Totally.
sometimes in the hiring process, the speed to hire metric, which is fine. That's nice to have, and I'm totally cool with it. But if we lean on it too much, that can be a problem.
Yeah.
And that's just one thing.
I totally agree. I totally agree. That's where I think when quantitative data is being collected, the qualitative matters so much because if you see, okay, it's taken, 70 days to hire, the average days to hire is 70 days. Well, there could have been a highly critical, like senior role that was open for 150 days. You're not going to just hire someone off the street. Like, you really want to make sure that that person is the right fit. They go through the right number of interviews. Maybe they even have a project. I mean, these are things that I agree. There has to be a balance between how a metric is weighed and how a metric is understood qualitatively. And actually, when we think about the economics of this, every business makes an investment every time they hire someone. We talk about investment all the time. You talk about investment all the time, I'm sure, when you're talking about candidates for companies. And the same goes with things like programs and incentives and perks that employees are offered. Like an employee referral program, for example, you're not going to lose money on that. Like throw money at that program because you're going to like studies show that employee referrals stay longer, they're more engaged, they're more productive, and they're more connected because someone brought them there. And all of those things really matter. You get so much ROI when you really think about where your investment is. This is why I say, like, some things are low hanging fruit. To me, that is low hanging fruit. Like, why wouldn't you invest in an employee referral program?
Exactly. I don't know. And again, I see seriously, and I see some companies. I won't name a company, but there's one company that I know that there's, I don't know, 10, 12,000 employees. They won't hire anybody that has any even distant blood relationship to a current employee.
uh,
And I mean, I would think that would be kind of a great thing, right? Let's say my second cousin wants to work there. Nope. You know,
you know what I call that? I call that too much fear over litigation and litigiousness.
it's got to be right.
Unfortunately, it is. It 100% is. And this is where HR leaders have to be really discerning about how far they push certain policies. Obviously, those are things that are also supported by attorneys.
Yeah.
Like HR people are not just creating those policies,
Correct.
but it seems like there was probably a situation at some point where two people who were relatives, there was an issue and it created a whole issue in a department or across the company. And they were like, we're not going to do any of it.
Right.
And so, or maybe they were even sued over something.
I'm
Who
sure they
who
were.
knows?
Yeah.
And yeah, and so then
Again, economic incentive there. We're coming back to it.
Right, exactly. We're
It's
coming back to a full circle, right. So then it's like you have this fear of litigation. Obviously some states more than others are more litigious. And so they don't even want to touch it. They want to avoid it 100%. And I've seen that in some of the larger companies that I've worked for where they don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. So they just say no to everything. And I get it. But at the same time, this is where you can't hold everyone's feet to the fire. You have to give organizations and leaders the ability to be flexible. So I learned from actually my last boss, who was amazing. She taught me something really impactful, I'll say, and very interesting, which is that not something that I ever thought about, which is when you write a handbook, which I've partaken in many handbook writing sessions over my career, probably every year, frankly. And when you write a handbook, you can't automatically either become a hypocrite or contradict yourself. And I was like, huh, that's a really great perspective. Like, if a company has relatives employed, your policy has to be flexible. It can't say no relatives can be employed here. Like, it has to be like, in the event that blah 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 blah, that you have to seek manager approval, whatever that flexibility is, right? Whatever the verbiage is. And it was a very interesting learning experience for me because I kind of grew up in very, very like strict, very conservative, policy driven companies. And then I found myself in an organization that was much more fluid. And that can be a very hard thing to reconcile, that you think that policy strictness is the way to go, but then it's like, how do you create a policy that's more flexible, that allows for even more gray area? And then how do you navigate within all that gray area? But my point being that when companies create handbooks like that, they better not contradict themselves. They better not have, in like manager to employee relationships. They better not have employees who are related. They better not like all of these things. So I would imagine that it's really coming from getting too close to the sun and pulling so far back that now they're way too strict.
it's got to be. It's got to be because with a company that size, that's a huge source of referrals.
Absolutely. And it could just be that they don't work on the same team.
Right.
They don't work in the same
Even
department,
if
or they
I
don't
have a
work in
cousin
HR.
in
Like,
Mexico City, they can't work there. Or
yeah,
second
it's
cousin.
crazy.
It's
I
right.
think that's insane.
Uh,
At the end of the day, I mean, like, someone that is a family member or relative, like, they're not going to refer a family member to work at a you don't automatically want to work with your family. So if they're referring, like, this is where you have to, I think companies and really HR leaders just have to think, am I preventing my business partners or my company from operating productively and easily by enforcing these things? And it is sometimes a song and dance, because sometimes you do have to have more strict policies around things. Like, harassment policies are always going to be strict, and they always should be strict, for example. But something like this, maybe it's a matter of like where they can work or what functions within the business. Maybe they can't have access to employee data like finance and HR and accounting. That's fine. Let them work elsewhere.
I knew an instance with this company where the recruiters internally reached out to a candidate, spoke to the candidate, liked the candidate. Do you know anybody that works here? Yes, they knew somebody, XYZ relative. Sorry, strict policy. We can't even talk to you anymore. Click. That was the end of that.
Oh my gosh.
So
Yeah.
it happens.
It's like, all
So
right.
last
Wow.
question here that I have for you, and I'm sure you hear about this, and I'm sure you talk about this. AI in it. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to. It's a big rabbit hole. I don't want to kill you with that one. What are your thoughts there? I mean, I get different perspectives from a lot of different folks. I'm really curious about yours.
Yeah. Well, first of all, we have been using AI for way longer than we realize.
Yes.
Google, for example, is a search function, not artificial intelligence at some level. Obviously, it goes without saying, I'm not an engineer. I don't code. I have no idea whether that's true or not. But I can only imagine that the first iterations of AI, of the way that we use AI technology, started much long ago. Anyway, I think AI is great. It's like any other tool or resource. You have to know how to use it. So, like, sure, you could onboard like QuickBooks or Intuit or whatever for your business, but if you don't know how to actually manage your books or manage your, accounting in and out, then what good is it? So, yeah, or like if you don't know how to use FaceTime and you're trying to use FaceTime, what good is it if you don't know? Like it goes with anything. So to me, AI, I use ChatGPT every day. For whether it's for, and I don't use it for, confidential or personal information because you don't know where your inputs are going. That's one caveat I'll say. So you don't want to put, like any intellectual property or confidential information into these things. However, they are really great brainstorming tools. And I think similarly with AI and especially on the basis of automation, I mean, I work for a company that leverages and is an AI based company. I mean, I work for Legion Technologies, which is a workforce management software company, and we're all about like intelligent automation, and that's on the back of AI. And so I really believe in knowing how to harness the power of AI. I don't believe that AI is something that should or will take over human centric jobs for the most part. I do think that people who, are kind of stagnant, don't really think about innovating in their roles, they're not really thinking, kind of broader strokes and aren't kind of part of this strategic process within a business, they might see more of an effect on AI on their jobs, like, someone in an administrative role. But that's not a guarantee because you can always level up your skills. You can always be more competitive than a tool.
Sure.
Like I'm sure you've seen different AI powered like recruiting tools.
Yeah.
They never replace a human like interacting with a candidate because they can't,
They
because
can.
candidates still want the human interaction. So as long as, the customer or the candidate or the employee wants that human and face-to-face interaction, which by the way, they always will, I think, putting my stamp on that, then there's always going to be a need and a demand for the human. And you can use another example where you chat with someone, like, I don't know, I fly Delta a lot, I use Expedia a lot. If I'm chatting with someone, I'm like, just connect me with an agent.
Yeah.
Just connect me with an agent,
Right.
right? And that to me is like a good example of how you have AI as a tool to answer basic questions that could really suffice. But then other times you also have a person to be able to support with whatever that other person might need. So big fan.
Yeah, it's going to make us all better, faster, smarter. What we do, it'll take the
Yeah,
mundane stuff, knock that off our plate, right, and then we can focus
exactly.
on the other, the stuff that we spent 2 hours a day doing. Now we can we can get rid of that 2 hours. Now we got a full 8 hour day. We can do 2 more hours of something more
Exactly.
productive. And in recruiting with AI, I mean AI along the same lines can help you hone down your list of who you're going to call. It's not going to make it a perfect list
Totally.
because it's unstructured data really, but it will help you make that list a little bit shorter. But you talked about it earlier. I still got to advise folks. I still got to talk about dollars. I still got to talk. I always call it their drivers. I still got to talk about their motivation, the company's motivation. I got to talk about where do you want to live? How hybrid can you be? Those kinds of things. And
Yeah.
throughout the whole process, I'm a salesperson. I'm an arbitrator. I'm a negotiator. I'm a psychologist. I'm a marriage counselor. I'm a real estate agent, right? AI is not doing any of that.
No, and you know what? This is a great way to like kind of bring all of what we've talked about together because first of all, the blockbuster effect. If you're not using AI, you're going to fall behind because it's here. You got to companies have to figure out how they're going to use it, what their policies around AI usage are. And the other side of things is that we know that from a productivity standpoint, we can't be all or nothing with these tools. And so when we think about like even these policies that we talked about that being way too strict or way too lenient, like you can't, there were companies I think earlier this year that were like, "Oh, I think maybe it was UKG who said we're going to eliminate these roles and we're investing in AI." That's not the way to do it. It's just not. And again, these are my opinions, not like a reflection of anyone else other than my own opinions. And I just think, like anything else, you can't be all or nothing. You have to learn how to use these tools to make your jobs better, easier, and more productive. Like what I use ChatGPT for has eliminated hours of work that I'm then able to spend and invest in other things that are much more impactful on the organization.
Agreed. Agreed. And that's where I think
Yeah.
we are, and that's where I think we should be, at least
Hmm.
for now, with AI.
Yeah.
But to eliminate, I think that, because I talk to the heads of IT and at these companies, and I can see it in their eyes, and I can hear it in their voices. They're getting pushed by the COOs, the CFOs, the CEOs who hear about AI on the golf course or whatever, and their buddies are making a lot of money with it or something, and then they're not. The use
Yeah,
cases
it's
aren't
not.
there. They're starting to get different use cases, right? Comparing contracts, whatever it might be. But,
Look, everyone was afraid of Bitcoin at one
right,
time.
sure.
And now there are all of these other types of cryptocurrencies. Like we have two options. We can be afraid and never use it and avoid and then become Blockbuster.
Yeah, right.
Because look at Netflix, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It is the antithetical example to Blockbuster. And then the other option is to embrace it, figure out how to leverage it,
Yeah.
and really harness its power to do some really good work in our own roles and our own organizations.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, this was all great stuff. This was awesome.
Thank you.
Now,
It was so fun being on this side of the
I bet.
podcasting
Yeah.
fence. Yeah.
You were going. I like it. I like
Yeah.
it. So I have, unless you have something else you want to cover, I have one final question. This
Tell me.
question I ask of all my guests.
Mhm.
Okay. I like live music. So my wife and I, we go and we see a lot of concerts and this and that and the other thing.
Nice.
So I like asking every guest, if they've seen live music, what was your favorite concert you ever saw in your entire life?
Okay, I have to say I'm a huge Beyoncé fan. I'm actually seeing her in like 2 weeks.
Very cool.
I've seen her many times and I've spent a lot of money seeing her. So she's always top of the list for me. I have to say, I saw Coldplay a few years ago and I was blown away. And I was not really a Coldplay fan.
Yeah.
And when I saw them live, I was like, oh my gosh, like,
That's
why am I not
awesome.
listening to their
Really?
music? Yeah,
Yeah.
my in-laws just like took us. Um, and I have to say, I had the pleasure of seeing BB King when I was in middle school or high school.
Yeah.
And that was so cool. Like, he was, I guess, in his 80s when I saw him. I won tickets on the radio. I think I was listening to like 101.5, which is a New Jersey radio. This is like kids, if anyone's listening, that's like Gen Z. They're going to be like, what do you mean radio?
Yeah.
No one listens to
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But this was like already, 20 years ago or so. And
Yeah.
I won tickets and my mom and I went and I was like, this was amazing.
Yeah, he's good.
So I have a few people. Yeah, I have a few people up there.
That's funny. Yeah, we go to see a lot of music, and I have 2 daughters. So my wife and I go to see different concerts, but one that we're gonna go see in September that I just bought tickets for the 4 of us to go to is, Lady Gaga in MSG.
Oh, that's going to be amazing. I've never seen her.
My 25-year-old says the
Wow.
same thing. She's head over heels right now that we're going to that, so.
Oh my gosh. I heard, first of all, she like beat the record. She just had a free show in Casablanca, I
I
think.
saw that. Gigantic.
Yeah. 2.5
2.5 million
million
people.
people.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
insane.
Yeah. She's very talented. To me, you can really appreciate someone's talent when you're sitting and you're experiencing live music.
Oh,
Like,
yeah. And everybody's
sure
got a
people
different
sound
experience,
good.
right? The
Yes.
candidate
Yes.
journey in the concert is different for everybody, right?
Yes. Have you ever heard of like the concert hangover?
No.
Like it's that feeling after the concert ends and
Maybe
you're like, oh, I wish it was still going, like that
maybe
feeling.
that's why I like going to so many concerts, 'cause
Yeah,
everybody.
because you're like, I want that feeling again where you're just enjoying like the moment and you're enjoying the experience and the music. And then like you leave and you're like, I need that again.
Well, for me, so I meditate, right? I don't, I use the
Nice.
Calm app, right?
Oh, good. Yeah.
And which is great. Tamara Levitt, and but concerts are kind of the same, like you said. You're in the moment. You're right there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome.
So it is the same sort of thing. So anyway,
Yeah.
well,
Enjoy Lady Gaga.
yeah, it should be fun. We're really excited. So yeah, they're
That's
excited
awesome.
too. So anyway, well, thank you for joining
Love
me.
that.
This has been
Yeah.
great. For our listeners, if you liked what you heard or saw, like us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple. Go find us there, follow us, like us, and we'll see you on the next one.